Hi, I'm Tom, and this is going to be a quick review of how you can build a database that depends on other databases using Bobrix. So we're just going to look at the documentation a little bit for Bobrix, and then we'll go ahead and start building something, and we'll see how far we get. All right, so Bobrix can be installed really easily. Just go to docs.bobrix.ai, and you can run pip install Bobrix, Bobrix configure, and then you can install databases with Bobrix. So let's go ahead and start with that. So we can do pip install. I'm going to run upgrade Bobrix. And we've got Bobrix now. We'll run Bobrix configure. And I have an existing configuration here, and we're going to overwrite that. So we'll use a new location. We'll go ahead and use temp Bobrix. And we'll use the token I already have there. Okay, so now we have Bobrix installed. Let's go ahead and make a project. We're going to call this project Chem Harmony. And go ahead and get in there. And then we're going to open that folder. And we'll go ahead and initialize that as a Git repository. Okay, so now that I have a project started, I can go ahead and initialize Bobrix within this project. And that just adds a .bb subdirectory within my project Chem Harmony. So for this project, I might be interested in analyzing data from, let's say, what should we use? ToxCast or Tox21 or just one of the big chemical databases out there. So a good choice for that might be Chembl or the integrated chemistry environment. Let's go ahead and start with, let's say, ToxValDB. So to do this, we can do Bobrix add ToxValDB. And Bobrix is going to go ahead and pull ToxValDB. And ToxValDB has a whole bunch of toxicology information. So it actually pulls information from a lot of databases itself. It's a pretty interesting database. I suggest Googling it, and you'll learn all about it. And after we've run Bobrix add here, you see that our .bb directory changed a little bit. We have a dependencies.txt now, and all that dependency says is that we have this dependency on a database that has definitions at this Git repository, at this Git hash. So this commit hash, we're pulling the most recent hash. So basically, we just pulled a database, and we installed that database. And then we also get a symlink to an actual copy of that database. So if I were to start R now, if I do library Bobrix, and I do, let's just pull in tidyverse as well. Okay, so now we can just say we want to take a look at ToxValDB, and we'll say bb load ToxValDB, and what do we have here? Okay, so we have ToxValDB. Let's go ahead and zoom this in a little bit, make it a little easier to see here. Is that good enough? That's probably good enough. All right. So TValDB we just defined, what was it? Yeah, TValDB. And it has one variable. So it's a list with one entry, and that entry is ToxValDB. If we take a look at that, we can see what kind of data is in there. So we see DTXID, that's some sort of identifier for substances. CASRN, that's another identifier for substances, name, and so on. So let's go ahead and get started here. We're going to make a notebook for analyzing this, and we'll just call it, if we're going to be depending on somehow extracting data from ToxValDB, we'll just call this integrate ToxValDB. Somehow we're going to be integrating that data into our own project. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and use the pacman package for loading packages. I'm going to load Bobrix, tidyverse, and arrow. So make this a little bit bigger. There we go. Okay, so we started a notebook here, and we have all the packages we need. And I'll just run this line again. So Bobrix, bb load, ToxValDB, and actually it's not a giant database, so it fits in RAM pretty easily. So we'll just go ahead and do tval_db $toxval_db collect. So let's go ahead and run that. That's my cat. So tval_db, what do we have here? Let's give it just a little bit of time to load. And there you go. So we've got tons of data in here. So you can see the substance IDs, the cast numbers, the names. Let's take a look at some of those names. We can run glimpse. Just take a look at some of the values in each of these columns. So we can see a lot of the columns just have, some sort of indicator of missing information, I would guess. And then we can see things like methyl ethyl ketone, a bunch of those, and sources, Cosmos, USFDA, CIFSAN, PAFA, I'm not sure what that is. You've got types, you've got risk assessment classes, and so on. So there's a lot of interesting information in here that we could really dig into. One challenge right off the bat with this resource is that there's no, I don't see any sort of INCHI or SMILES, any sort of a chemical identifier that I can use to build models if I'm going to build a QSAR model or something like that. So I might want to pull in that data. So I happen to know a database that has information about DTX substance IDs. So let's go ahead and pull in that database. So I'm going to open another terminal here, and we're going to do BioBricks add CompTox. And we're going to give it a second to pull that database. So this database doesn't exist on my machine right now, and you can see it got pulled pretty fast, and now we have the CompTox database. If we take a look at our .bb/dependencies.txt, you can see there it is. We have both the toxval_db resource and a CompTox resource. Just to show you, what this is, we can go here. We can see this the actual code for building this database and where it comes from, and learn about it. But in this case, we're just going to focusing on using the data. So we'll say CompTox, and we'll say that that's we want to load that up, and we'll run that. And we can see that it has, this is another brick that just has one asset. So it's called DSS Tox identifiers. And we'll go ahead and just call that CompTox. And we'll just abbreviate, make it a little shorter. Make this one a little shorter too. And run this. And there's CompTox, and we'll run that. And so we'll collect this one as well. Let's just make this a little wider again. There we go. Okay, so now we have two databases loaded into RAM here. Just so you can see again, here's the toxval_db. It's just going to take a second since I reloaded it. There it is again. And if we're interested in modeling this data, we want to pull in some sort of structural descriptions of these compounds that we're looking at. So let's take a look and see what we've got in CTOX. So for CTOX, we have the DTX SID, which is the same thing we're seeing here. And then we have a preferred name, and then we have an INCHI and an INCHI key. So an INCHI is what we're looking for here. So so for CTOX, we're just going to go ahead and pull that information. Give it a second to load. Okay, so what we're really interested in CTOX is we just want to select DTX SID and INCHI. That's all we're really interested in. So let's take a look at CTOX again. Okay, so that's looking pretty good now. So let's ask, how many rows do we have in this toxval_db database? So we're interested in toxval_db because it seems to have a lot of information about compounds, like information about risk assessment classes and studies and the outcomes of those studies. So it tells us a lot about the toxicological properties of compounds. Whereas comptox, the DSS tox identifiers variable anyways, it has information about those identifiers like DTX, SID, and NG. So, you know, let's just, I had about 900K here, 935, 123, and we can ask, you know, if we join these things, yeah, so we're going to take toxValDB, let's make it an inner join. We're going to inner join it by ctox, and yeah, if we take a look at the column names, we can see this column name is DTX SID, this column name is DTX SID, so we can actually just join on DTX SID, although GitHub Copilot did a great job of finishing that line. Okay, so we run this, we get our data frame back, and go ahead and take a look at that data frame, and sure enough, we've got a bunch of INCHI in there now. We can ask, you know, how many rows are in there, and we only lost about 10% of the data set, so that's pretty good. We could investigate this more and try to figure out exactly what is in, what are the DTX SIDs that are missing. You know, maybe there's some sort of incomplete database here somewhere, but this is not a bad start. So what we've got now is a Git repository, and it has a dependency on 2 other databases. At this point, we could do something interesting, like just build a new database that combines those 2 databases, but then we'd have problems with keeping the data up to date. Fortunately, Bobrix makes it easy to keep these databases up to date. All you have to do is update that dependency whenever it's changed, and run the code once again. So that's the value proposition for ChemHarmony. It makes it dead easy to pull these giant databases and start combining them and building new databases. And that's where I'm going to end the video for today.